Hello everybody, in this video we're going to be doing a review of the Revit Family Editor. The Revit Family Editor is something that I introduced to you all in prior courses, but we didn't really get a chance to go too deep into it. So for our first module here, for the first 3 weeks of this course, we're going to really be taking a deep look into the Revit Family Editor and see what all it can do and how we can use it. So first I'm going to start off with just sort of a basic review of what the Family Editor is and what it does, and then we will work on creating some of our own families going forward that are a little bit more detailed than what we may have done in the past. All right, so I have my Revit home screen loaded up here. The first thing I'm going to do is go to create a new family over here on the left side. I just want to show you these family templates first. So if I go in here to my English Imperial, here is a look at all of the Revit family template files that we have available to us. So whenever we're going to start creating a new family, we want to base the template that we are using for the family based on what we are actually creating. So for instance, if we were creating like a piece of furniture, we would want to find the furniture template, right? So furniture is usually what we're going to be using. If it's just something very simple and basic, we're probably just going to be fine sticking with the generic model. And as you can see, there's all these different types of generic model families in here, or generic model templates, I should say. And it all is based on the use of the family. All right, so a better way to illustrate that would be maybe looking at lighting fixtures. So if we're looking at a light fixture, if you really think about it, we have all types of different light fixtures. We have sconces that go on the wall. We have, the most basic type of light fixture, which is going to be something that's ceiling mounted. And then you also might have light fixtures that are just like floor lamps or something like that. Like that's considered a light fixture as well, obviously. So based on how that family is going to be used within the project is going to determine the type of template that we select. And the selection is very important because these control hosting. So hosting is something we've talked about previously, but hosting is basically the way that an object interacts with different model elements. So for instance, if I were going to want something that is a ceiling light fixture, I'd want to choose ceiling based because that will tell Revit to mount the light fixture within ceilings and actually cut a hole for the light fixture out of the ceiling within the model. Something that's wall based, like a sconce, that's going to tell Revit that I can place that sconce on a wall in floor plan and it will automatically snap to that wall and I don't have to do that manually. But then something here, which is just the basic light fixture, this isn't a very intelligent template, so Revit's not really going to know really what to do with it. So this is something we're going to get into more in depth later on, but I just kind of wanted to cover that first. So what I'm going to do here is start by taking a look at one of these sample families that they have. So we're just going to open up this table and sort of take a look at it and see what they did here to create it. So we start off in our default 3D view. So I'm just going to go to the reference level floor plan view to get a better look. All right, and as you can see, they have here set up a few constraints and also some parameters. All right. So if you took my methods and materials class last semester, you should be pretty familiar with constraints and parameters and sort of what they do. We kind of touched on that in a very basic sense, but basically a parameter is a way to control different aspects of the family. So dimensions, for example, that's what these two constraints are controlling. They're controlling the length of the table and then also the width of the table. But for these dimensions to work properly, you have to set up what are known as constraints, okay? So constraints are basically a way of tying the actual geometry. So for instance, the geometry here, which is this extrusion, we're going to be tying the edges of that extrusion to what are called reference planes. Okay, and those are these green dashed lines here. So if I were to take this reference plane line that was drawn and drag it, you're going to see that everything sort of moves together, and that's because all of this has been locked to the reference plane, so the geometry is locked to it, and everything has sort of been tied together. So that is a constraint, meaning that it's locked in place. It can't move freely, right? So it's being constrained by something. Sort of makes sense. So if we take a look here on the left side, let's see, over here is our family types editor, and this is what you typically see within the Revit project itself, but within the family it's controlled over here on the left side. If I were to click on this, you should be familiar with this dialog box that pops up, but this is the place where we just control all of the different parameters that we have assigned to our object. Okay, so we have different categories in here. We have our constraints, which you don't really need to worry about too much. What we're really concerned about is like the things like the materials and finishes, and then also the dimensions. All right, so obviously if I were to go in here and change these dimensions, these are all metric right now, so it's a little bit confusing to know what these are actually going to be doing, but let's just change some of these. So let's try 800 and click apply, and then we can see over here in our viewport what that's doing. So let's do something a little bit more drastic, like 1,000. So everything is being widened, and if you look at it, it's not just the table top that's being widened. You can see these feet here for the table, and those are actually moving with it. All right, so that would be an example of a constraint where they have set up some sort of a lock to tie the feet position to the edge of the table, so that if anything is adjusted, it will move, and that the feet wouldn't just stay where they are by default. All right, and then obviously we also have the materials and the finishes. So what you're looking at here, and again, we're going to go more in depth later on when we start creating our own family, so you don't have to remember every single thing I'm saying here. I'm just trying to give a little bit of an overview. But what we are dealing with here are known as type parameters, and we know that because they are within the family types dialog box here. Right, so what a type parameter does is basically you can set up a bunch of presets for a specific family. So we have our table here. Let's just return that back to what it is by default. So there we go. That's the default size. Let's say we wanted to create a few different versions of this table. So maybe we have a version that's just used as like a side table that you would put next to a sofa. And then maybe we have a slightly altered version that has a little bit different dimensions that we can use as like a coffee table, and then maybe a third one that we can use as like a dining room table. If we don't want to go out and find those actual different families, we just want to sort of get a quick concept out or something, and we just want a space plan, we can just use one family, and we can create a bunch of different versions of that family and sort of toggle through them and then put them wherever we want in the space to sort of get an idea. So if I were to go back to my family types editor and click this drop down here, you can see they already have like 3 presets made. So these are those dimensions. So 610 by 160, 610 by 915, and then what we're on currently, which is 762 by 762, so a square. But if I were to toggle through those and then just click one, you can see as I do that, these length and width dimensions are updating. All right, so let's try this one, and you can see then the width updates, and then if I click this one, they all update again. So let's try the first one again and then click apply, and then you can see everything sort of shrinks down to that 610 by 610. Again, with the second one, it's going to be a little bit wider, and then the third one is going to be again back to a square shape. So the way that you create these different family types is by going up here to this new type button and then clicking that. So let's just do one maybe that is 1000 by 1000 millimeters. Click OK. So now you can see I'm set to that 1000 by 1000, but then I actually have to go in and change these parameters. So we're going to do length 1000, and then we're going to do width 1000. Click apply. You'll see that everything updates to that size, and then if I click OK and go back in, we have that new type that is now a part of this, okay? And that's going to be permanently a part of the family until you actually go in and like delete it out. So let's say I want to get rid of one. I can click on the name of it, and then I can click delete type, and that's going to get rid of it. And now I just have those 3 types in here. All right, and you can do this for anything. So it doesn't just have to be the dimensions. You can go within the family and you can set up different materials based on the type of table. So let's say for a side table, maybe you wanted that to be like this birch color for the material, but then maybe for the coffee table you wanted that to be like a walnut or something. So you could actually come in here, switch to that different type that you created, and then set that to be a different material. So we'll just switch it to something else. For example, here doesn't really matter what we choose, but sure, roofs. So we'll click that, we'll click apply, and then if I switch between these types, you'll see that it's going to switch back to birch. But then if I go back to that original one, see it says roofs. So you can really customize these families and make them exactly how you want them within the family, so that whenever you go and load that into the project, it's going to stay consistent from project to project. So you don't have to go in and actually re-update all of them manually within the project itself. All right, so that's what a instance parameter, or I'm sorry, a type parameter does. So it's controlled by this family types box. And then just really quickly to kind of illustrate how that looks in a project, just to review, let's go ahead and just create a new project. Then we're going to toggle back to our family. So if we hold the control key and then click tab, that's going to switch us back to our family editor. Then we're going to just load that into the project, and then we're going to place one here in the middle. All right, so now if I go ahead and I click on this table, over here on the left side, if I click on that edit type button, you can see that is essentially the same window that we were dealing with in the family editor. Okay, so here's our type properties box, and we have control over all the exact same things. And you can actually make changes here as well. So if I wanted to change something about this family type here, like the dimension of it, I could update that dimension and click apply. Oh, that's the height. We're not going to be able to see that. Let's do the width, 2 feet. Click apply. We can see that change happen. I can go in and I can rename this and make the changes to that dimension here and update that if I want to. And then we can just click OK, and we can make a few copies of these. So if I were to go here and use my copy tool and copy a couple of those, if I go back to my edit type dialog box and I make another change, you'll be able to see that I'm making a change to all 3 of these at the exact same time because I'm controlling the type property here and overriding it. All right. If I were to go back, if I were to leave this as is and then go back to my family editor and reload this into the project, actually that didn't do what I thought it was going to do. Sometimes when you do that, it will ask you if you want to override the changes that you made and revert it back to what is actually defined within the family itself. Let's see. So if I go back to my family editor and I make a change here, click apply, load that in. There we go. It's going to ask us if we want to override that because we made a change within the family itself. So if we override existing version and parameter values, you can see then it's going to update all three of those based on what we did within the family editor. All right, so that's what a type parameter does. So all of these parameters, right, height, length, width, these are type parameters because they're tied to the type properties dialog. And that's going to control every single instance of this table throughout the entire project. All right, if we make one change there, as you saw, it updated the dimensions of every single version of that same table throughout the entire project, right? It did all three of these. So now we're going to talk about the second type of parameter, and this is what's known as an instance parameter. So let's go back to the sample family. All right, and let's create, let me think here. Let's go to the family types box, and then let's click on one of these parameters that we have here for the dimensions. So if I were to click on the length and then go down here, and you want to make sure that this is highlighted black. All right, you know that you have it selected then. If you go down here to the edit parameter button, which is this little pencil, you can see here that we get a few different options. We can first of all rename the parameter if we want it to be something else. But if you go here to the right, you can see that there are these two options, type parameter and instance parameter. If I switch this to an instance parameter and click OK, you're going to see that this has a default setting tied to it. So if this ever says default, you know that it's an instance parameter. And what that means is this is the, you can set basically a default value that it's going to come into the project with. So it's going to load in, and by default it will always be this 1500, or you can change it. But if I click apply and then click OK and then load this back into the project, and then let's just override. Now if I go in here and I click on one of these, you're going to see a few things that are a little bit different. All right, first of all, I now have this dimensions parameter over here within my properties panel underneath of the family. That was not there before. This is where I can then go in and I can change this to whatever I want. So let's say 3 feet. All right, so watch closely. What you'll notice is this one updated, but the other two didn't. All right. That's because an instance parameter is controlling the dimensions of that table on a case-by-case basis. All right, so you're controlling individually each instance of that object. All right, we're not controlling everything all at the same time throughout the whole project. We just want to have control over one particular family in the project, a particular thing about it, something very specific. Another thing you'll notice is because this is an instance parameter and it's not tied to all these other ones, all three of these other tables, if I drag this down here, you get these little grips, and you can actually just drag these and manually stretch objects, and you can see that that length parameter automatically updates to reflect the new length of the table. So that's pretty cool. All right, but as you can see, an instance parameter just allows you to have a little bit finer control over each object within the project. Right, so if I wanted to accomplish the same thing with this type parameter, basically I would have to go in here and I'd have to create a new type. So if I duplicated this and then made one with new dimensions, and I want all three of these to be different, I'd have to go in here and actually change it that way, right? So let's say the width is a little bit different. So we'll just do 3 feet for the width. So then that updates, and then all three of them are different. All right, so instance parameters are typically really good for doing things like materials. So let's say you had a particular family. It could be anything. Maybe it's like chairs or something, and you wanted it to be the exact same chair, but you wanted the upholstery on it to be different for each instance of the chair. So what you would want to do, we'll just do it with our table here. What you would want to do is go in here to the family, and then we'll go to our material, and then we'll set that to be an instance. We'll do that for both of them. Click apply, click OK. We'll load into project, and then we'll just override. Now, if I go here and I go to place that table back in and create a couple copies of it, I'll switch to a 3D view to get a little better idea of what's going on here. So let's just click on the first one, and then we'll go here to our materials, and we'll click there to bring up the material editor. I'm just going to create just a basic colored material. Let's call this one red. Go here to the graphic properties, and we'll just pick red for that. Click apply, click OK, and then I'm going to click on the name and copy it to my clipboard with Control C. Click down here, highlight all this, Control V to override that, click apply. And then if I switch my view to be like a consistent colors, you can see that one is now red and the other ones have stayed the way that they were. So then if I click on this one, go in here, find my red, duplicate that, we'll call this one blue, and then we'll duplicate it one more time. We'll change the color first. Let's do just blue. Duplicate that, we'll call this one green. Go here to our green, change the color to green. Okay. So now if I go here and then I make both these green, and then I do blue, there we go. So we have the exact same table, exact same sizes, but we get to control the colors independent of one another. And then you could even go here and then modify the type properties of these tables. So if I were to go in here then and change the width back to something else, so let's just do 2 foot, well, let's do 5 foot, so we can really see the change. Click apply. You can see all of them got taller because they're being controlled by the type parameter, but the color is staying unique between the three of them because that is an instance parameter. All right, so hopefully that helps to kind of explain the difference between those two different parameter types and when you would want to use them. Type parameters are really good when you have a really big project and you have a lot of the same thing. Let's say you're doing like a really big office space and you have a bunch of these office chairs at all of the workstations, and maybe they're all the exact same kind of office chair. So you would probably want to set most of the stuff for those office chairs, if you know they're all going to be the same, as a type parameter. Then let's say down the line something about those chairs has to change. Let's say it's like the material, all right, the fabric of the chair. And you know that every single chair within the office is going to have that same upholstery. If you have that set up as a type parameter, that's really nice, because all you have to do is click on it, click edit type, find the material parameter within here, change it, and then that's going to change it on every single chair throughout the entire project. Whereas if this were set up as an instance material like we have here, you would have to go click on every single one of them individually, update that material to something else. So let's say we want these all to be blue, right? We have to go to each of these individually and set them to be blue to accomplish the same thing. So when it comes to changing and modifying things, type parameters are really good for that. When it comes to maybe just a few objects throughout the project, it's not a really big deal to manually control them. That's where type parameter or instance parameters are really good, all right, because it gives you that control over those different properties of the family. All right, let's see if there's anything else useful to look at inside this family before we move on. So you can see in our different views, like we had our floor plan view, and that's where you're going to be setting up your length and width, the dimensions that you would see within a plan view. But then if you go to one of your elevation views, actually any of the elevation views, you're going to be able to see this height parameter. So you actually have to toggle to the different views to create these different parameters. Let's see really quickly if anything is being hidden here. Doesn't look like it. All right, so if we look at the actual forms that are being used to create this table, this is a very just basic, simple family. If we click on the top here, you can see that is an extrusion. Okay, and then these legs are also an extrusion, and these were all created within a single extrusion because they are all highlighting together. So if I were to select those and then click on edit extrusion, that's a little bit hard to see. Let me fix this. All right, there we go. Maybe a little bit bigger. Nope, not that big. All right. All right, so if you look here, this is what I mentioned earlier about how they actually set up constraints to keep these feet at the correct position within whenever the table gets a little bit bigger. All right, so the constraints I'm referring to are these dimensions here. So I'm just going to go ahead and actually delete these out so that you can kind of see what I'm referring to. If you recall also, the pink that you're seeing, this is just the sketch mode. So you're actually going to be drawing all the shapes in 2D with these pink lines. And you'll know you're in sketch mode when you kind of get this green color within the ribbon here and you get your drawing tools. All right. To exit the sketch mode when you're finished, you have to click the green check mark, and that's going to finish that. But now if I go in here and let's just try to update the dimensions of this again, the length of it. So if I switch the length to something bigger, we should see the feet stay in the current location and not move with the table. Oh, so of course it moved that way. Let's see. Let's try 300. All right, let me try doing it to these ones. Okay, take two. Let's see. Length. No, they're still going. So there must be something else that's controlling that. Let's see. I'm just going to create a new one here really quick. See if that changes anything. Nope. All right, well, we'll cover that later on, and we'll figure out how to do that when we create our own family. I think that's about it for this sample family. So the next thing that I want to do just really quickly is kind of illustrate how to make something very basic from scratch, so that you kind of remember the process of putting in these constraints and reference planes and setting up all the dimensions. So what I'm going to do is close out of this family. Now I'm going to leave the, we'll create a new project. Let's close out of this family totally. Don't save changes. I'm going to go to new family. And I'm just going to do a generic model. So the most basic family that you can do, this is the most simple basic family, generic model. And what I'm going to do is create something very simple. So it's just going to be a box, and we're going to be able to do the exact same things with it that we did with the table in the previous example, but it's just going to illustrate how you set all this up from scratch. So whenever you're starting a family, you're going to be greeted with these little crosshairs, I suppose. And what you want to do is basically have your family created in the very center of these two intersecting lines. So to do that, I'm going to start off with a reference plane. So on the Create tab, you'll see reference plane. And I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to draw a couple of these lines in. Now the lines, it doesn't really matter where you place them. We just want them to be, within these quadrants, going across either line both ways. But the length and stuff doesn't matter, and the placement doesn't really matter. So for example, I'm going to start in this quadrant and draw one down to this quadrant here. I'm going to do another one over here, and then one here, and then one here. And the placement doesn't really matter because our constraints are going to actually fix it and make them all equal. All right, so now that we drew those, we can actually click on these and give them names to make it a little bit easier for us to kind of understand what's going on. So I'm going to call this one right. I'm going to call this one left. Call this one top. Call this one bottom. Okay, so those are in, but now we actually have to tell Revit to sort of move them around. So the next thing is to go here to the Annotate tab, and then we're going to choose our Align dimension. And then we're going to create a couple different dimensions in both directions. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to create a dimension from top to our middle reference line, and then another one down to the bottom reference line. Then we're going to click over here to finish that. And then what I'm going to do, this is very important, I'm going to click on the EQ button here. And that's going to make the distance between the two of these equidistant. So what that does now is if I were to click on one of these and drag it, you can see the bottom one is dragging at the exact same dimension, and these are staying consistently equal to one another. If we didn't have that, well, you'll see in a second. So what I'm going to do is then create another align dimension. This one is going to be between here, the top, and the bottom. Then I'm going to drag that out to the right beyond the two EQ dimensions that we have here. Okay. So what I'm going to do with this is select the dimension itself. And then this is where you actually add in the parameter. So this is where we would create the width or the length parameter. So we're going to click on the dimension, go up here to the label dimension section, and click on create parameter. So now we're familiar with this dialog box. This is what came up when we were editing the parameter previously and switching the type to the instance. I'm going to leave this as a type parameter, and I'm going to call this one length, and then click OK. And now that updates, and you can see it says length equals 4 foot 4 inches. If I go here to my family types, you can see that that length parameter has also been added. So now it says length underneath the dimensions, and I can control that here. So if I set that to like 5 feet, click apply, you can see that updates to 5 feet. You can even control it here. So if you double click on this, you can actually go in here and then change it there as well. Okay, so now let's create another dimension. This time, let's just go from here to here, from left to right, and not put the EQ dimension in. Okay, and then I'm going to click on that, click on label, create a new parameter. We're going to set this one to width. Click OK. And let's see what is going to happen if we didn't put those EQ dimensions in there. So let's set this to 6 feet. You can see only one side moved. All right, so basically it used this as a fixed point, and it expanded it to the right until it got to that 6 foot mark. So if you don't put those EQ dimensions in, your family is going to kind of expand and contract in unpredictable ways, which is not what you want. It will mess up the center point of the family, and it will make it harder to place it within the project. So you always want to include these EQ dimensions to keep things correct. So let's click on the dimension here, click CS to create similar, and then we'll just add in that EQ dimension from left to middle, and then from middle to right, and then drag up, and then click on EQ. That is then going to update the width parameter, and then we can set the width parameter back to 6 feet. There we go. So everything is now sort of equal. And then at this point, if your lines are not fully crossing, just go ahead and take them and drag them all the way through one another. Again, it doesn't really matter what the dimension is. You just want to make sure they're fully intersecting with one another, because it makes it a little bit easier to draw our geometry in. All right, so that does it for length and width, our floor plan dimensions. The next step is actually to add in our shape. So let's see, let's just maybe instead of the box, let's actually try to recreate that table that we looked at previously. So let's go here, and the first shape is going to be an extrusion. So what's really nice about Revit, and I'm sure you're familiar with this already, but it has these tooltips that pop up when you hover over the buttons. So if you're not familiar with how a specific tool works, you can just hover over it and you can see exactly what it does and how you actually create the different objects. So we're going to start with an extrusion. And I'm just going to use the rectangle option, and I'm going to start at one corner and then go to the opposite corner down here. Okay. And then this step is really important. So you'll see all of these little locking icons have appeared. And this is where we actually tie the geometry to the reference planes that we made. If we did not lock these to them, then anytime we update these dimensions, nothing would happen. So we actually want to click and toggle on all these locks right now, like that. And then let's just click OK and make sure that everything is working correctly. So if I click on one of these reference planes and drag it, you can see the actual black line of the box is moving with it, which is perfect. All right, good. So let's go back in here. And I'm just going to click on that shape again and then go up here to Edit Extrusion to modify it to take me back to my sketch mode. Let's say one of these did not get locked by accident. So I'm going to unlock that and then actually drag it off of the reference plane. Click OK. So if I move this now, if I just grab one of these and move it, you can see it's just kind of off and it's not the way that we want it. So what we want to do in this case is actually click on, let me see if I can do it this way. You want to use your align tool. So if I click on the reference plane and then click on this edge, you can see the edge of the geometry actually moved and aligned to that plane, and then you get the option to lock it. So if you click it there, it should be fixed now, and you can just drag it and it will flex like you want it to. All right, so going back to the actual extrusion, the next step would be to add in those little fillets around the edges to make them rounded. So to do that, we can go to our fillet tool. So the fillet tool to do this is actually going to be one of these arcs over here. So let's go ahead and do the fillet arc. So we first have to select our two lines that are intersecting. So I'll do the top one and then I'll do the bottom one. And then it lets you drag and create the arc. So we're going to just throw it somewhere in here, this range. And then once you make it, you want to actually click escape a couple times, select the arc itself, and then click on this dimension and then set that dimension to what you want it to be. So let's say like 2 inches. Maybe something bigger like 3 inches. And then once you have that the way you want it to be, you actually want to go in and lock that shape in with these little lock icons. So these two little buttons here on either end, those are just going to make it so that when this shape moves around, when we expand and contract the different dimensions, that will always stay at a 3-inch radius. All right, and then you can do the exact same thing around all the other corners, or you can just click on this and then mirror it wherever you want it to go. So I'm gonna select the arc, click mirror, click on my axis, mirror it up there, and then just use my trim and extend tool to fix that. And then we can do the same thing here. So select both of them and then mirror it over the center. And then clean up those shapes. Like that. Then once we have it how we like it, we're just going to click on OK. And if we go back to our 3D view, you can see we now have that nice filleted edge to our tabletop. All right. So next thing that we have to do is actually control the thickness of this tabletop. As you can see, it's really, really thick, and we're going to want to set that. So if we go to our front, you can see that our tabletop right now is just sitting on top of the ground plane, and then it is a foot thick, which is not great. So what we want to do is add in a few different parameters to this elevation view to be able to control the height of everything. So the first thing that I'm going to do is, let's see, maybe go over here to the left side where it says constraints. I'm going to set my extrusion end to be, let's just try 2 feet. You're going to see that's going to make the whole thing taller. And then the extrusion start, let's just set that to be like 2 inches less than the extrusion end. So when I do that, that's going to move the bottom up 2 inches below the top. So we'll set that to be 1 foot 10 inches. And you can see now that is sort of just a 2-inch top that is floating above the ground plane there. So next, we actually have to tie this to some reference planes to make sure that it stays where we want it to go. So we're going to go back to the Create tab, click on Reference Plane. Then I'm just going to start at this endpoint and then drag a reference plane all the way through the right side. Click Escape and then click on that and then drag the other end of the reference plane back the other direction so I can click on it easily. Then I'm just going to copy this dimension downward, or I'm sorry, this reference plane. So we're going to copy that down to align with the bottom of the tabletop. Next thing we're going to do is go to the Annotate tab. We're going to add in some of those dimensions. So we're going to do a dimension between the two of these reference planes. And then again, we're going to add in our parameter that will control the thickness of this tabletop. So going in here, we're going to leave that as a type parameter, and we're going to call this top thickness 2 inches. Okay, so if we try to test that now, going here, you can see that we have that top thickness right there as 2 inches, and if I were to update that, you can see that the actual reference plane got bigger, but the geometry didn't. So it's always good to test to see if things are locked correctly. So that's telling me I need to use my Align tool now. So I'm going to go here to, actually I'm going to click on the geometry, go here to the Align tool, click on my bottom plane, and then click on the bottom of the tabletop, and then lock that. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the top. So top there to top there, and then click the lock, and now it should flex the way I want it to. So if I click 2 inches, there we go. You can see it switch back 2 inches. So that's how we're controlling the thickness of our tabletop. But how do we actually control how tall this table is? The way to do that then is to create another dimension. So Annotate, Aligned. We're going to do a dimension from this top reference plane that we created here to the bottom reference plane that's even with our ground level. So if I drag my cursor down, you can see right now this is selecting that actual level marker. It's that sort of like dashed line that has these little dots in it. That's not what we want. We want the green reference plane under it. So we're going to click on Tab to get to that. Click once, and then we're going to drag this over off to the side somewhere where we can read it. Then we're going to, let's click on this top thickness here, and let's just click the lock icon. Actually, I'll show you what that does and why we want to click it in a second. Let's add in the parameter there. So we're going to make this one height. Click OK. Now if I change that height to be like 3 foot, let's see if it's going to do what I think it's going to do. No, that actually worked. Okay. So we don't need to lock this. I was afraid that if we did that, it would just pull this up and it would leave the bottom edged like way down here, but I guess we don't need to lock it, so it's doing what we want. So if I were to go back here to family types now and change the height of the table, yes, that's working correctly. Everything is moving up and down, and the thickness of the tabletop is staying the way it needs to. Okay. So then the last thing would be to add in those table legs. So I'm just going to go back to the reference level, and I'm going to go here to create, and then we're going to create that as an extrusion. Now there's several different ways you could create these table legs. You could use all these different tools here, and we're going to cover these tools a little bit later on. Not in this video probably. So we're just going to do the most basic thing we can do, which is an extrusion. Now when we do this, let's see, I'm just going to create just a basic circle here in the corner. So if I were to do that and create that, you can see it created one circle. One approach would be to create an extrusion for each individual leg. So if I made one of those and then I copied it around to all the corners, you can see that they are separate then, right? So I click on one and it doesn't do both of them. Probably the most easiest way to do this, and that's the way they did it in the sample family, would just to be adding all of these legs within a single extrusion. So if I delete this out and then go back to edit extrusion, basically what they did is they copied this pink line around to all the corners. Something like that. And then when I click the green check mark, you can see they're all treated as a single object, and they're all going to sort of react in the same way when we try to adjust them. So I'm going to go back to the edit mode, and then I'm actually going to do the thing where I tie them to the edge of the table. And this is what I was trying to illustrate previously. If I were to go here and change the width, because these are not tied to any of the table geometry, when I update this to something, oh, so they, okay, I don't know why that is working. They must have updated something in this version of Revit, because it used to not do that. Try it again. Huh, yeah, it just works, I guess. All right, so forget that point. But what we can do is actually get these aligned perfectly so that they're this dimension here is equal to this dimension here. So what I'm going to do to do that is I'm going to click on one of these circles, and then over here on the left side you can see there's this thing under graphics, center mark visible. If I click on that, we get this little crosshair in the middle of our circle, which will allow us to control the dimensions a little bit better. Okay, so now that I have all of those, we're going to add in the dimensions. So annotate aligned. So let's click there and then align that to that center mark. And then we can set that to a dimension that we want. Let me see if it'll let me do it without making it a parameter. There we go. So if you actually click, I guess we don't even need this. Let's get rid of that. If I click on the circle, all right, undo. We do need it. If I click on the circle here, you can see that dimension, it changes a little bit. And now I can actually click on the dimension and change it to what I want it to be. So let's just make that 5 inches. And then we'll click on the dimension, do a CS to create similar, and then we'll go from the reference plane here to the center mark. And we will do the same thing where we click on the circle and then click on the dimension and then type 5 inches. There we go. Now it is equidistant. And then we can actually just delete these and mirror it. That's probably going to be the easiest way. So we're going to highlight all that stuff, mirror over the center, get rid of the dimension. We don't really need that now that they're where we want them to be. And then we will mirror that down, like so. Then we click the check mark. Let's go ahead and change these dimensions to make sure it's working properly. So 7 feet, 7 feet. Yeah, everything seems to be working. Final thing to do to make sure this is totally good is go to one of our elevation views. And then we have to align the tops of these table legs with the bottom of the tabletop. So we're going to use our align tool, click on this reference plane here, and then click on the top edge of our table legs, and then we're going to click on the lock. So now everything dimension-wise should be good. If I go here to my 3D view, we have our little table. And then what we can do is go to our family type editor, control our thickness of the tabletop. Let's try 3 inches. Okay, that works okay. Control the height, 3 feet. That works okay. And then we obviously know that width and length works correctly. Cool. So then what you can do is select these different components of the table. So let's say we want to add a material to this. If I click on the tabletop, we want to go here to this little tiny button on the right side that says Associate Family Parameter. Then we're going to create a new parameter here. And then again, we get the option to do a type parameter or an instance parameter. So I'm just going to make this, let's do the instance parameter. Set this to top. Okay, and then we'll click on the legs, do the exact same thing. Have to expand this slightly. There we go. You could also tie this to the top. If it was going to be the exact same material for the legs and the top, you could just click on top and then it would be the exact same thing to tie them together. But I'm going to make a new one for the legs so that they can be independent of one another. Click OK and then click OK. So now we will be able to control those. Oh, I need to fix that to be an instance. So now we have control over the material, and you can set a material within the project that it will have by default when it loads in. Right now, if it ever says by category, that means that it's just set to a very basic default gray material. But if you wanted that to be wood or something, you could go in here and you could set that to like a wood. Let's see if I can pull in something. Let's go for the birch semi-gloss. Rename birch. Let's make a new one then. Let's just do a different type of wood. Let's do like oak or something. So if you don't remember how to use the material editor, basically create new material is here. You can right click on it and then rename it. Over here where you actually control how it renders, that's under the Appearance tab. And if you want to pull something in from the default library of Revit materials, you just want to go to this Replace Asset button. And you can go in here and then search and basically find whatever you're looking for. So if maybe they have an oak in here. Yeah, let's just do this oak material. Actually, we'll do the semi-gloss. Yeah, then you click this button here, and that will load it in basically and override what's in there already. All right, so we have both of those. Click apply and then OK. And then this one will be that birch, like that. And then if I go down to my viewport visual style and I set that to realistic, should be able to see the texture of the wood. Yes, there we go. So you can see it applied that correctly. Now, if for some reason you wanted to control the material of all 4 legs individually, I don't know why you would. That would be a case where you wouldn't want to create all of these as a single object. You would have to create all 4 of them individually and then give all of them their own parameters. All right, so you can really go as in depth with this as you want to, but usually you don't need to go that far. But if you did, that is how you would do it. So the final thing that we can do then is go back here to our family types and then just make a couple of them. So maybe we have the 2 foot by 2 foot. Go ahead and set those to 2 foot by 2 foot. Whoops, not the height. Set the width to 2 foot. It's a weird looking table. Let's do 4 foot. There we go. That looks a lot better. All right, let's set that to 4 foot then. And then we can go ahead and just create another one. So let's just do 5 foot by 5 foot. Five foot by 5 foot. Okay, and then we could even do a new one, and let's just say like dining room table or something. And then we can just give this whatever dimensions of a dining room table. Let's say like 7 foot by 5 foot, I guess. There we go. And then click OK. Now, if I create a new project again, and then load that in, just like I showed you previously, we can go in here and we can go to our edit types and we can switch between these different types that we made within the family itself. So there's our 5 foot preset. You can see it gets bigger, and then we'll finish off with the dining room. So if you just click the drop down as well, it'll appear right there, dining room table, and it switches to the dining room table. All right, so just a very basic sort of overview of the family editor. As we go a little bit further on this week and next week, we'll dive a little bit deeper into some of those tools that we have available to us, and then actually get into creating a family that is a lot more custom, that has a lot more parameters tied to it, and also use a bunch of other types of geometry as well.